I want to show you biblically 3 ways. And again, this is not an exhaustive study. There are more that I could add to that, but for the sake of time, I think these are 3 that many people, the bulk of people, will identify with these 3 ways that God calls. Number 2, the progressive call. We see biblically defined a dramatic call in the life of Saul, but in the scriptures we also could walk through the pages of the Bible and define what I would call a progressive call. And this probably was my process at the age of 15, 16, 17 that led me from feeling like I could never serve the Lord in full-time ministry to coming to Zion for what ended up being my call. Because I didn't come to Zion to complete. I had made an agreement with God. Well, I'm not sure what I should do with my life, but I am a Christian, and I do love you, and I want to serve you no matter what capacity that might be. And so 1 year of Bible college education would be a good foundation and give me an opportunity to at least focus to find out specifically what you ask, because I didn't know. And I'm not going to embarrass anybody, but I would imagine there's probably not only freshmen, there's probably sophomores and perhaps even juniors and seniors who are still in that place. You're still wrestling through, what is it specifically that God has called me to do? The progressive call of God often involves a more gradual series of events in your life that leads you to begin to sense that perhaps God is calling me to full-time ministry. I came as a freshman pretty certain that I wasn't called into full-time ministry, but by graduation, I not only knew that I was called to full-time ministry, I had had a dramatic encounter in a prayer room where God called me to win 1 million souls, and I never told anybody about it till I was 38 years old, but I wrote it down on a piece of paper and tucked it into my Schofield Bible that my father had bought me before I came to Zion. And on that sheet of paper was a very simple statement. My goal is to win 1 million people to the Lord Jesus Christ. Never shared that with anyone until I was 38, because I thought people will think you're arrogant or you have ego or you think more highly of yourself. But a careful study of my history will show that from the age of 17 until today, I have never left the center stripe of that call. And even being here in the 4th quarter of my life, I'm still wrestling through the call of God when it comes to Northpoint and serving this sacred institution. But I've wrestled through that in fasting and prayer. I set aside and have set aside from October of last year until currently, and I'm not saying this in any way to boast, I'm just telling you that fasting and prayer must be a part of your spiritual disciplines. Jesus didn't say if you fast, he said when you fast. The first century church and on through their progression fasted 2 days a week for over 400 years. That was the early church discipline and spiritual formation. Because they took the words of Jesus literally when Jesus said, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the Pharisees, you can in no manner enter into the kingdom of heaven. They took that literally. As innocent, humble, new followers of Christ, they took that almost legalistically and thought, well, the Pharisees are fasting 2 days a week. Now, we're not going to fast the same 2 days as the Pharisees because we don't want to give a good housekeeping seal of approval to the Pharisees that Jesus condemned. And so we'll fast 2 different days. And the early church, and on for over 400 years, all Christians fasted 2 days a week. I am not making a case and asking you to fast 2 days a week. But I will ask you, if you're serious about the call of God, you're going to have to do some fasting and praying. If you're serious about becoming a man of God, you're going to have to do some fasting and praying. If you're serious about becoming a woman of God and carrying out God's call upon your life, you're going to have to do some fasting and praying. Fasting doesn't earn points with God. Fasting doesn't buy you privilege with God. Fasting is a crucifixion of your flesh where you in humility say, God, there is nothing on this earth and nothing in my fleshly appetite that is greater than wanting to know your will and your way and how to do it. And God speaks through fasting and prayer. And fasting accelerates the will of God. Did you catch that? Fasting accelerates what God is doing in your life. And I believe you could make a strong case that many of Christ's disciples did not fully understand their divine call in the infancy of Christ calling them. Their behavior was a clear indication that they didn't fully understand that divine call. But in raw faith, they accepted the challenge of Christ. But they certainly had no idea the historic impact that their lives would make, not only in the first century church, but continue to turn the world upside down in the 21st century. There certainly seemed to be a visible progression of the divine call of God upon those men handpicked by Jesus Christ in that journey of apostleship. Many that may be listening to me right now will probably identify with the progressive call of God. You're working some things out and you're working some things through. But I present a challenge to you just like Jesus presented a challenge to his disciples. Make sure before you graduate, you have wrestled until you won. Graduate knowing your calling. Graduate knowing the specifics of your calling, and it will develop throughout your life. I stand here today as a living testimony of what I'm preaching. And in the last several months, God made it clear to me that there was a progression in this assignment that perhaps I was blind to see. I'll never forget Dr. Crandall asking me to serve on the board of trustees when I was 34 years old. And I knew him well, and I remember asking him, I said, Dr. Crandall, because at 34, I'll be honest with you, it seemed like everybody on the board was 100 and up. I felt like a child with the wealth of wisdom and the distinguished people that sat on that board of trustees. I said, Dr. Crandall, I'm 34. I'm too young for this. He said, no. He said, every president of Zion, it was Zion at that time, has made an effort to put the vision into the hands of a next generation, knowing that they'll not fumble the ball. I'm not asking you to serve on the board of trustees because of your wisdom. I'm asking you to serve on the board of trustees because I know you'll always be a voice for the original vision of this school. Little did I know those words would be prophetic. I remember asking him for advice, and he said, don't say anything for the first 5 years. Which probably should have been 10 to 20. But for 30 years, I served on our board of trustees. For a little over 2 years as chairman of the board. From October until late March as interim president. And the day that I walked in and the board had asked me to take this current position, I made a vow to the Lord that I'll never say it again, but I've already said it. If you were paying attention, you know exactly how I felt. But what has kept me in this assignment over the last several months is the knowledge that God never calls anybody to fail. And you're a unique chapter in the history of Northpoint because you're going to walk through this with me. We're going to walk through this together. That's why I so deeply appreciate our faculty and our staff. Because post-pandemic, The people that are here are the people who have stuck by the stuff. The people that are here are the people who have said in their heart that my future security is not more important than a single-purpose Bible college that's raising up a holy army of young people to do the work and the will of God. God has brought us almost like a Gideon's army down to the river and brought us to a place where we are totally and completely dependent upon him. And as president, you're going to walk through this with me. And it's not going to harm your ministry. It's going to give you a privilege in ministry that other classes have not had, because you're going to see the miracle power of God. You're going to see the provision of God. You're going to actually witness how God took us from where we're at today to where we need to be tomorrow. And when by God's grace, if Jesus tarries, you enter into the ministry, you will have a deeper arsenal in your ministry calling, because you've already walked halls of faith. You've always walked through the battles that we're currently going through, and you'll know how to believe God. You'll know how to believe God for property. You'll know how to believe God for finances. You'll know how to see miracles appear out of thin air as God validates your calling as you do what he calls you to do.